The alarm blared through Jupiter Research Station 6. Red lights flashed in the narrow corridors as Dr. Alan Parker sprinted from his quarters. Sleep still clouded his eyes, but adrenaline was quickly washing it away. Something had triggered the anomaly detection system, and as chief scientist, he needed to know what. Olivia Wright was already at the main console when Alan arrived at the observation deck. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, bringing up sensor readings and astronomical data. Her usual neat ponytail had come undone, brown hair falling across her face as she worked. "What do we have?" Alan asked, catching his breath. Olivia didn't look up. Massive gravitational distortion at the edge of the Kuiper belt. Something big just dropped out of what looks like faster-than-light travel. Alan felt his mouth go dry. Natural phenomenon. No chance. Olivia finally turned to him, her face pale in the blue light of the monitors. "It's decelerating in a controlled pattern. And it's huge. At least 2 kilometers long." Alan steadied himself against the console. After decades of searching the stars, sending signals into the void, and debating whether humanity was alone, the answer had arrived. And it had come not to Earth, but to their little research station orbiting Jupiter. "Contact Earth Defense Command," he said. "Use the quantum channel. Priority Alpha." Olivia nodded and opened the secure communication line. As she did, another alarm sounded. "Alan, we're receiving a transmission from the object. Put it through." The speakers crackled, then cleared. A deep voice spoke in perfect English. "Attention inhabitants of star system 78 to 324b. The Galactic HFY Empire claims this star system in the name of Emperor Krozoth VI. Prepare for inspection and classification." The message repeated in Mandarin, Russian, Spanish, and several other Earth languages. It ended with a set of coordinates on Mars. "They know we're here," Alan whispered. "They've been watching us." Within hours, the news reached Earth. The United Defense Council, a body created precisely for this scenario, but never expected to be needed, convened in their underground chamber beneath Geneva. 24 representatives from Earth's nations sat around a circular table, faces grim as they watched the sensor footage from Jupiter. General William Hayes, a stocky man with gray hair and a perpetual frown, stood at the head of the table. "The alien vessel has maintained its position. Our deep space telescopes confirm it's a spacecraft of artificial origin. We're dealing with first contact." A murmur ran through the room. "What do these Xerans want?" asked the representative from Brazil. "To claim our solar system, apparently," replied General Hayes. "They've requested a meeting on Mars." "We need someone who can represent humanity," said the Chinese representative. "Someone with diplomatic experience but also military knowledge." All eyes turned to Commander Susan Blackwell. At 43, she had served with distinction in the Space Navy and later in diplomatic missions to the Mars and Luna colonies during their independence disputes. Her dark skin contrasted with the silver streaks in her short-cropped hair. "Commander Blackwell," General Hayes said, "will you lead our delegation?" Susan looked around the room. The weight of humanity's future settled on her shoulders. "I will." While the Council prepared the diplomatic mission, Intelligence Officer Jack Collins received his own assignment. A tall man with sandy blonde hair and sharp blue eyes, Collins had an uncanny ability to find patterns where others saw noise. "I want everything we can learn from their transmission," General Hayes told him. "Language patterns, technological clues, cultural indicators, anything that might give us an edge." Collins nodded. "I'll assemble my team immediately, sir." As Earth prepared for the meeting, the alien ship released smaller vessels that took up positions around the outer planets. They made no aggressive moves, but their message was clear. They had Earth surrounded. In her quarters, Commander Blackwell studied everything humanity knew about first contact protocols. All theoretical until now. Tomorrow, she would board the ship that would take her team to Mars. She would be the first human to speak with an alien civilization, and Earth's future might depend on what she said. The stars had always seemed silent and empty. Now they had spoken, and Susan wasn't sure she liked what they had to say. The red dust of Mars swirled around the landing site as Commander Susan Blackwell led her team out of the shuttle. 5 humans stepping onto the planet's surface, not to expand humanity's reach among the stars, but to meet those who had come from them. Susan squinted against the sunlight reflecting off a massive structure that hadn't been there a day before. The XRN ship had landed overnight, and its crew had constructed a dome-like building for the meeting. It gleamed like polished obsidian under the pale Martian sun. "Impressive," muttered Dr. Frank Martinez, the xenobiologist on Susan's team. "They built that in hours." Susan nodded but kept her thoughts to herself. The display of technological superiority was intentional. The XRNs wanted humans to feel small. The delegation approached the structure. As they drew near, a section of the wall simply disappeared, revealing an entrance. Susan took a deep breath inside her suit and led her team forward. The interior was lit with a soft blue light. The air felt heavy, warmer than humans preferred. At the center of the large room stood 3 tall figures. Susan had seen images from the probe cameras, but nothing prepared her for her first real glimpse of the aliens. The XRNs stood nearly 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in scales that shifted between green and blue as they moved. 4 arms extended from powerful torsos, each hand bearing 3 long fingers. Their heads were elongated, with large, unblinking eyes the color of molten gold. "Welcome, representatives of Earth," said the central figure. Its voice came not from its mouth, but from a small device on what seemed to be its chest. "I am Lord Sarek, voice of Emperor Krozoth VI." Susan stepped forward. "I am Commander Susan Blackwell. On behalf of Earth, we welcome peaceful contact with the XRN Empire." Lord Sarek's head tilted slightly. "Peace is available to all who accept the Empire's protection. That is why we are here." The meeting lasted 3 hours. Susan and her team sat across from the XRNs at a low table that had risen from the floor at Sarek's gesture. The terms became increasingly clear and increasingly troubling. "The Empire offers Earth technology beyond your current understanding," Sarek explained. "Medical advances that will end disease. Energy sources that will power your world for millennia. Protection from the many dangers that lurk between the stars." "And what does the Empire ask in return?" Susan questioned. "Reasonable tribute, resources, workers for our core worlds. And of course, the surrender of all military capabilities. No protectorate maintains independent defense forces." Susan kept her face neutral. "And if Earth does not wish to become a protectorate?" The alien scales darkened. "Then pacification becomes necessary. It is not our preferred approach." "Pacification," Susan repeated. "What does that entail?" "It would be better not to find out, Commander," Sarek said. "You have one of your Earth months to consider our generous offer. We will return for your answer." Back on Earth, the council chambers erupted in argument after Susan's report. Some representatives were already convinced that resistance was impossible. "You saw their technology," the French representative shouted. "They built a structure in hours that would take us months. Their ships crossed distances we can barely comprehend. And you trust them." Jack Collins spoke up from his seat at the intelligence briefing station. "I've analyzed the language patterns in their communications. They're careful to use words like protection and tribute, but the reality is conquest and slavery." Susan stood. "We need more information before we decide. The XRNs are powerful, yes, but they're also careful. They didn't simply attack. That suggests something." "What?" asked General Hayes. "That they might not be as powerful as they want us to believe," Susan replied, "or that they have weaknesses we don't yet understand." Later that night, Susan found Collins waiting outside her office. His face was tense with excitement. "I need to show you something," he said in a low voice. "I've been digging through historical records, looking for anything that might help us understand these aliens. And I think they've been here before, Collins said. A long time ago. And if I'm right, we might have more time to prepare than just 1 month. Susan glanced around the empty hallway. Show me. Jack Collins led Susan through the secure levels of the Defense Council headquarters. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as they descended to the archives section, where the oldest and most classified records were kept. What exactly are we looking for? Susan asked as Jack scanned his badge at the final security checkpoint. The Tunguska event, 1908, Jack said. The heavy doors slid open with a hiss. Something crashed in Siberia. The impact flattened more than 80 million trees over 830 square miles. No crater was ever found. Inside the archive, Jack pulled up files on a secure terminal. For decades, scientists thought it was a meteor or comet fragment. But in the 1970s, a Soviet expedition found something they couldn't explain. He displayed black and white photographs of twisted metal fragments with unusual markings. These were classified at the highest level. When the Soviet Union fell, Russian officials quietly transferred them to international custody. You think this was a XRN ship? Susan asked, studying the images. The material isn't from Earth. Analysis shows it's an alloy we still can't replicate. And look at these markings. Jack pointed to symbols etched into the metal. They match patterns in the XRN transmission. Susan felt a chill run through her. They've been watching us for over a century. Maybe longer, Jack said. And here's something else interesting. The recovery team reported getting sick after handling these fragments. Symptoms included radiation poisoning, but with unusual characteristics. Before Susan could respond, her secure communicator buzzed. Blackwell here. Commander, this is Dr. Laura Chen. I need to see you immediately. It's about the XRNs. 20 minutes later, Susan and Jack stood in Dr. Chen's laboratory. Laura Chen was the leading xenobiologist on Earth, a brilliant scientist with a soft voice that belied her intense personality. She'd been analyzing the limited biological data they had on the XRNs. I've been studying the atmospheric composition inside their meeting structure on Mars, Dr. Chen explained, bringing up data on her screen. They created an environment specific to their needs. The mixture contains unusual levels of certain gases and radiation signatures. What does that tell us? Susan asked. Their biology depends on specific radiation wavelengths. It's part of their metabolic process, Laura explained. But here's the interesting part. Certain elements common on Earth disrupt that process. Specifically, rare earth metals like cerium and neodymium. Jack leaned forward. Are you saying these elements are toxic to them? Not immediately lethal, but they cause cellular degradation over time. It would be like radiation poisoning for humans. It explains why the recovery team at Tunguska got sick. They were exposed to XRN biological material that was breaking down. Susan processed this information. So Earth's natural composition is potentially harmful to them. That's why they're offering to be our protectors rather than just moving in. Exactly, Laura said. They want our resources, but they need us to extract them safely. Jack pulled up another file on his tablet. There's more. I've been analyzing their fleet movements. They claim to have hundreds of ships throughout our system, but our deep space sensors only detect 12 major vessels. They're bluffing, Susan realized, making themselves seem more powerful than they are. It fits with their communication patterns, Jack added. They use language of overwhelming force, but are careful to avoid actual conflict. I think they're stretched thin across space. They can't afford a prolonged engagement, so they use fear to subjugate planets without fighting. Susan looked between her two colleagues, the beginnings of a plan forming in her mind. If they've been here before, if they have these weaknesses, and if they're not as numerous as they claim, then Earth might have a chance, Laura finished. We need to bring this to the Council immediately, Susan said. But first, I want a team assembled. The three of us, plus weapons specialist Eric Donovan, and communications expert Maria Sanchez. What are you thinking? Jack asked. Susan's eyes hardened with determination. I'm thinking it's time humanity sent a message to the Exaran Empire. Not one of surrender, but a warning they'll never forget. Commander Susan Blackwell's team gathered in a secure room deep beneath Geneva. The walls were lined with material that blocked all signals, ensuring their plans remained secret. 2 weeks remained until the Exarans returned for Earth's answer. Eric Donovan arrived last, carrying a heavy case. He was a broad-shouldered man with a quiet intensity about him. As Earth's leading weapons specialist, he had designed defense systems for the lunar colonies and asteroid mining operations. "Sorry I'm late," he said, placing the case on the table. "Had to make sure this was ready." Maria Sanchez looked up from her data pad. Her expertise in communications had helped decode messages from the deepest space probes. Now she was tasked with understanding the Exarans. "What did you bring us?" Eric opened the case, revealing a metallic sphere about the size of a baseball. A prototype based on Dr. Chen's findings. Laura Chen moved closer to examine it. "You've incorporated the rare earth elements. Cerium, neodymium, and several others," Eric confirmed, "in a form that can be dispersed as particles small enough to be inhaled by the Exarans, but not immediately detected by their sensors." Susan nodded appreciatively. "And the effects?" "Temporary cellular disruption," Laura explained. "It won't kill them, but it will incapacitate them for several hours. More importantly, it will demonstrate that we understand their biological weaknesses." Jack Collins pulled up a holographic display of the solar system, highlighting the positions of the Exaran ships. "We'll need more than one demonstration weapon. Their fleet is scattered, maintaining positions near each major planet." "I've been thinking about that," Susan said. "We're not going to fight a war against their entire fleet. We just need to send a message that makes them reconsider whether Earth is worth the trouble." She turned to the group. "I'm calling it the warning shot protocol. A demonstration of capability without starting an interstellar war." Susan outlined her plan. Earth would appear to be considering the Exarans' offer while secretly preparing defenses. When the Exarans returned for their answer, Susan would lead a delegation carrying Eric's device, disguised as a ceremonial gift. "Maria, I need you to create a false communication trail," Susan instructed. "Make it look like Earth's nations are divided. Some willing to surrender, others refusing." Maria nodded. "I can do that. I'll create artificial news broadcasts and government communications they can intercept. Jack, I need everything you can find on their ship layouts and command structure." Jack tapped his tablet. "Already working on it. Their ships have similar designs to the fragments found at Tunguska. I believe their bridge will be located in the center of the vessel, protected from outside attack. Laura, work with Eric on delivery mechanisms for the compound. We need options." "What about our actual defenses?" Eric asked. "If this doesn't work, and they attack?" Susan's expression was grim. "The Council has authorized full military readiness, but quietly. Old nuclear silos are being retrofitted with new payloads based on Laura's research. Space platforms are being repositioned to create a defensive screen. Do you think it will be enough?" Maria asked quietly. "It has to be," Susan replied. "But our best option is to convince them we're not worth the fight." The team worked through the night, refining their plan. By morning, Eric had produced 3 more prototype devices. Laura had completed simulations showing the compound's effectiveness against Exaran physiology. Jack had mapped probable locations of all 12 Exaran vessels, confirming they were indeed fewer in number than claimed. As dawn broke, Susan stood at the window, looking up at the sky. Somewhere beyond the blue, the Exarans waited, certain of their victory. They believed they faced a primitive, divided species that would bow before superior technology. They were about to learn how dangerous such assumptions could be. "We're almost out of time," Susan said to her team. "Let's make sure humanity's first warning to an alien empire is one they'll never forget." Jack Collins sat in a dimly lit room surrounded by screens showing news broadcasts from around the world. Each one told a different story about Earth's response to the Exaran ultimatum. None of them were real. Eastern Coalition considers surrender, read one headline. Another showed protesters in London carrying signs that read "Resist Alien Oppression." A third displayed military vehicles moving through New York City streets, suggesting preparations for war. "How's it looking?" Susan asked as she entered the room. Jack smiled. "If the Terrans are watching these broadcasts, they'll think Earth is in chaos. Some nations ready to surrender, others preparing to fight, and most caught in between." Maria Sanchez joined them, holding a datapad. "We've detected Xeran communication probes in our satellite network. They're collecting our fake news feeds exactly as planned." "Good," Susan said. "Let them think we're divided and vulnerable. It will make our unified response all the more shocking." Across the Atlantic, in a military bunker beneath the Scottish Highlands, Eric Donovan made final adjustments to what appeared to be an ornate metal container. Its surface was decorated with symbols of Earth's nations, but its interior contained the weapon they had designed. "The delivery mechanism is ready," he said over the secure line. "Once activated, it will release the compound as an aerosol. The electromagnetic pulse will follow 30 seconds later, disrupting their systems temporarily." "Any chance their sensors will detect it?" Susan asked. "Not if Dr. Chen's calculations are correct. The container is lined with materials that should mask the contents from their scanning technology." Laura Chen's voice joined the conversation. "The compound is stable and ready. Testing confirms it will affect Xeran physiology without being lethal. They'll experience something similar to extreme vertigo and muscle weakness in humans." Susan nodded to herself. One part of their plan was complete. Now for the more challenging aspect. "Jack, what about the negotiation delay?" "I've prepared a detailed diplomatic request for an extension," Jack replied. "I've loaded it with technical language and procedural references that should confuse their translators. It won't buy us much time, but every hour counts." The next day, Susan transmitted the request to the Xeran flagship. As expected, Lord Surik was displeased, but granted a 48-hour extension to allow Earth's fractured leadership to reach consensus. During those 2 days, Earth's actual preparations continued in secret. Military satellites were quietly repositioned. Defense systems were placed on high alert. The rare Earth compound was mass-produced in underground facilities around the world. Susan used the time to study everything they knew about Xeran culture and behavior. Jack's analysis suggested they placed high value on displays of strength, but despised unnecessary violence. They conquered through intimidation when possible, fighting only when required. "They're bullies," Susan concluded. "They succeeded because most species surrender without testing their actual power." On the final day before the extended deadline, Susan gathered her team for one last briefing. "Tomorrow, we meet them on their flagship. The gift container holds our demonstration weapon. Once I activate it, we'll have seconds to deliver our message before they react." "And if they decide to attack anyway?" Maria asked. "Then we've prepared as best we can," Susan replied. "But I don't think they will. Everything we've learned suggests the Xeran Empire conquers the easy targets. They avoid costly conflicts." Eric checked his equipment one final time. "The container is ready. The activation code is set to your voice pattern. Just say Earth sends greetings to the Xeran Empire in their presence, and it will begin the sequence." That night, Susan couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, looking up at the stars. Tomorrow, she would either save Earth or doom it. The weight of that responsibility pressed on her like a physical force. Her communicator chimed. It was Jack. "Final intelligence report confirms all Xeran ships are maintaining their positions. No new vessels have entered the system." "They're still bluffing," Susan said. "Let's make sure they know we are not." The shuttle carrying Susan and her team docked with the Xeran flagship. Through the viewport, Earth looked small and vulnerable, a blue marble against the blackness of space. Susan took a deep breath. Her team was quiet, each focused on their role in what was about to happen. Eric carried the ornate container, his hand steady despite the pressure. Jack wore special glasses that would record everything for later analysis. Maria was ready to translate any nuances in the Exaran language their universal translators might miss. Laura monitored a small device that would tell her how the Exarans reacted physically to their demonstration. "Remember," Susan said quietly as the airlock began to cycle, "we show no fear. We are representing all of humanity today." They stepped onto the Exaran ship. The corridor was tall and wide, designed for beings larger than humans. The lighting had a blue-green quality that made human skin look sickly. Two Exaran guards led them through winding passages toward the command center. The flagship's interior was more organic than human vessels, with curved walls that seemed to pulse slightly. Susan noted that there were fewer crew members visible than she had expected, another sign that the Exarans were stretched thin. The command center was a vast chamber with a curved ceiling that displayed the stars outside. Lord Sarek waited on a raised platform, flanked by other Exarans in ornate armor. Their scales glittered in the starlight as they moved. Commander Blackwell, Lord Sarek's translator device conveyed his words. "You have kept us waiting. The Emperor does not appreciate delay." Susan stepped forward, her posture straight and confident. "Lord Sarek, Earth thanks you for your patience. Our world has considered your offer carefully." "And your answer?" Sarek's golden eyes fixed on her. "Before we give our final decision, we wish to present a gift." Susan gestured to Eric, who stepped forward with the container, a symbol of Earth's artistic and technological achievements. Sarek's head tilted in what Susan had learned was a gesture of curiosity. "A gift is not necessary, but it will be accepted." Eric placed the container on a low table before the Exaran delegation. Susan moved closer to it. "Earth sends greetings to the Exaran Empire," she said clearly, activating the hidden mechanism. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a soft hiss came from the container as it released an invisible mist of particles into the air. The Exarans showed no immediate reaction, but Susan knew the compound was now entering their respiratory systems. Sarek leaned forward. "Now your answer to the Emperor's generous offer." Susan stood her ground. "Lord Sarek, I must inform you that Earth has unanimously rejected becoming a protectorate of the Exaran Empire." The alien scales darkened with anger. "Then you choose pacification. Unwise. Before you make threats," Susan continued calmly, "you should know that the gift we just presented contains a compound specifically designed to affect Exaran physiology." As if on cue, one of the Exaran guards swayed slightly. Another put a hand to its elongated head. "What have you done?" Sarek demanded, his own voice now strained. "The compound is temporarily disrupting your cellular functions," Susan explained. "In approximately 20 seconds, an electromagnetic pulse will also disable your ship's systems briefly." Sarek tried to rise but stumbled. The other Exarans were showing similar signs of distress. "This is an act of war." "No," Susan corrected. "This is a demonstration. The compound will wear off in a few hours with no permanent damage. But it proves that we understand your biological vulnerabilities." The lights flickered as the pulse activated. Several Exaran crew members had fallen to their knees, their scales now a dull gray color. Susan stepped closer to Sarek, who was struggling to remain upright. "Earth has identified all Exaran biological weaknesses. We have mapped your fleet positions. We know you number only 12 ships, not the hundreds you claimed." Sarek's golden eyes widened. "This is humanity's only warning," Susan said, her voice steady and clear. "Earth will not be conquered or pacified. If the Exaran Empire attempts to take our world, we will defend ourselves using what we now know about you. The cost to your empire would be devastating." Susan nodded to her team. "We will leave now and allow your systems to recover. You have 24 hours to withdraw your ships from our solar system." As they turned to leave, Sarek called out, his voice weakened but still defiant. "The Empire does not respond to threats." Susan looked back once. "This isn't a threat, Lord Sarek. It's a promise." The shuttle returned to Earth in tense silence. None of the team spoke until they were safely inside Earth's defense perimeter. Then, simultaneously, they all started talking. Did you see their faces when they realized what was happening? Eric asked, a grin spreading across his normally serious face. The readings were incredible, Laura said, reviewing data on her tablet. The compound worked exactly as predicted. Their cellular structure began breaking down within seconds of exposure. Maria was less jubilant. They looked furious. What if they decide to attack anyway? Then we're ready, Susan said, her voice steady. But I don't think they will. Sarek's reaction wasn't just anger. I saw fear. Back at Defense Council headquarters, they were greeted as heroes, but Susan quickly reminded everyone that the danger hadn't passed. The next 24 hours are critical. The Exorans could retreat, or they could launch a desperate attack. General Hayes ordered all defense systems to maximum readiness. Around the world, missile silos loaded with warheads containing the rare Earth compound stood prepared. Orbital platforms positioned themselves to create a defensive shield around Earth. Jack Collins established a monitoring station with screens showing the positions of all Xeran vessels. So far, no movement. They're maintaining their positions. They're talking to their homeworld, Maria said, working at a communication console. We've intercepted fragments of transmissions. They're asking for instructions. Susan watched the screens intently. That's telling. They didn't expect resistance. They don't have a protocol for this situation. Hours passed with no change. The team took turns resting, but Susan remained at the command center. She couldn't sleep while Earth's fate hung in the balance. As the 18-hour mark approached, Jack called her attention to a screen. Commander, we have movement. 2 of the smaller Xeran vessels are changing position. Everyone tensed, watching as the alien ships adjusted their orbits. But instead of approaching Earth, they moved outward, toward the edge of the solar system. Are they leaving? Eric asked. Or repositioning for attack? General Hayes cautioned. Laura joined them, carrying new data. I've completed the analysis of the biological samples we collected. I can confirm that a planetary-scale release of the compound would be devastating to Xeran physiology. If they try to invade, they'd suffer mass casualties simply from exposure to our atmosphere once we seed it. Susan nodded grimly. Make sure that information leaks through channels that Xerans are monitoring. By the 22-hour mark, 3 more Xeran ships had begun moving outward. The flagship remained in Earth orbit, its weapon systems active, but not targeting anything. They're splitting the difference, Jack observed, moving some ships to safety while maintaining a threat. Susan considered this. It's a face-saving measure. They don't want to appear to be retreating completely, but they're hedging their bets. At precisely 24 hours from Susan's warning, all remaining Xeran ships began moving away from Earth, including the flagship. They maintained formation as they passed Mars' orbit, then Jupiter. The command center erupted in cheers, but Susan remained focused. Track them all the way out. Make sure they're actually leaving the system. Hours later, the Xeran fleet reached the edge of the solar system. Long-range sensors detected energy signatures consistent with faster-than-light drives powering up. They're preparing to jump, Jack confirmed. All ships except the flagship. Why is the flagship staying? General Hayes asked. A communication alert sounded. Maria looked up from her console. Incoming transmission from Lord Sarek. He's requesting a private communication with Commander Blackwell. All eyes turned to Susan. She straightened her uniform. Put him through. Sarek's image appeared on the main screen. His scales had regained their color, but he looked somehow diminished. Commander Blackwell, before we depart your system, there is something you should know. Susan maintained her composure. I'm listening, Lord Sarek. In 4,000 years of expansion, the Xeran Empire has only twice encountered species that earned what we call sovereign exception. You are now the third. Susan's expression remained neutral. What does that mean exactly? It means, Sarek said, that the Empire will classify Sol as a system to be avoided. No Imperial forces will enter your boundaries again. He paused, then added something unexpected. But there are others in the galaxy who might be drawn to your uniqueness. Susan's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. What do you mean by others? Sarek's golden eyes seemed to study her. The galaxy is vast, Commander Blackwell. The Exeran Empire is powerful, but we are not alone among the stars. Some races are peaceful, others far more aggressive than we are. And you think these others will come here? Word spreads. A species that successfully defy the Empire will draw attention. Sarek paused. I request permission to dock my shuttle. There are matters best discussed in person before we depart. Susan consulted silently with General Hayes, who nodded cautiously. Permission granted, Lord Sarek. One shuttle only. You may bring 2 guards. An hour later, Susan waited in a conference room as Sarek was escorted in. The alien seemed different somehow, less imperious than during their previous meetings. Commander, he said, settling into a specially prepared chair that accommodated his larger frame. What your species accomplished was unexpected. We protect what's ours, Susan replied simply. Yes, that quality is rarer than you might imagine. Sarek placed a small device on the table. This contains star charts marking territories of other spacefaring civilizations near your system. Some might become valuable trading partners. Others should be avoided at all costs. Susan looked at the device but didn't touch it. Why give us this? The Empire does not forget defiance, but we respect strength. Sarek said, I am not authorized to offer alliance, but I can offer information. He activated the device, projecting a holographic map of the galaxy. Here is Earth. He indicated a small point of light. The Exeran Empire extends through this region, a large section illuminated in blue. These areas, Sarek continued, as red sections appeared, are controlled by races even we avoid. The Krull Dominion are conquerors who destroy rather than rule. The Vex Collective assimilates other species, erasing their identity and culture. Susan studied the map carefully. And the green areas, neutral zones, and less aggressive civilizations, potential allies, perhaps. Susan considered this unexpected gift. Why really are you helping us, Lord Sarek? The alien was silent for a moment. In my 800 years, I have seen many worlds fall to the Empire. Most surrender immediately. Some fight briefly, then collapse. None have ever done what Earth did, demonstrate power without using it destructively. He stood, towering over Susan. It would be unfortunate if such an interesting species were eliminated by others before reaching their potential. After Sarek departed, Susan brought her team together one final time. They watched from the observation deck as the Exeran flagship accelerated away from Earth, vanishing in a flash of light as it jumped to faster than light travel. So that's it? Maria asked. We won. For now, Susan replied. But we've also announced our presence to the galaxy. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. General Hayes approached with a document. The Council has approved the formation of a new agency, Extraterrestrial Defense and Diplomatic Corps. They want you to lead it, Commander. Susan looked at her team. Only if I can keep all of you. We just stood up to an alien empire, Jack said with a smile. I wouldn't miss what comes next. 1 month later, Susan stood in a newly constructed facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. Around her, hundreds of personnel worked to understand the star charts Sarek had provided and develop new defenses based on what they'd learned. Eric had already designed improved versions of the weapons they used against the Exerans. Laura was leading research into other potential biological agents that might protect Earth from future threats. Maria and Jack had established a deep space monitoring network to provide early warning of approaching ships. Outside, humanity continued its daily life, most people unaware how close they had come to subjugation. Few knew that Earth now had a reputation among the stars, a small world that had given the only warning it ever would. As Susan reviewed reports from new space defense platforms being constructed in orbit, She reflected on Sarek's parting words. They had prevailed against one empire, but the galaxy was vast and full of unknown dangers. Director Blackwell, her assistant, called. "We're detecting an unusual signal from beyond Neptune's orbit." Susan straightened her uniform. Whatever was coming, Earth would be ready. "Put it on screen. Let's see who's visiting now."